name's Dan. I live in the city centre. I was very pleased to hear all that was going on about especially in Nottingham, for improving the road system and the problem with congested buses. But I've certainly got an issue to whoever can answer it, so to anybody really, as I try to depend on public transport a lot, the biggest problem is that it's just I find it very unreliable, mainly because there's too many buses on various streets, like Hanover Street for a start off, and Queen Square I find can be a nightmare. Well, even the T-junction at Lime Street, that is a real nightmare because it gets ever so congested. And what's worse is I find that where there are traffic lights, it seems that there are roads that are not served by buses that are getting more priority than where the buses go. In other words, whenever the lights go to red, when a bus is approaching, they have to wait nearly 2 minutes, and when the lights do go to green, they only get about a few seconds, and I'm very keen to find out more about how we can make public transport a lot more reliable, and because I find it ever so slow just getting out of the city.
Yeah, that's working. No, I think that's a fantastic point, because actually at the end of the day, as your experience shows, that one of the key ways of making sure that we attract people on public transport and keep people on public transport is making sure it's a good offer, and reliability and the speed of journey, making sure it's as efficient as possible, is a key part of that offer. It's really quite interesting in terms of some of the things that we're looking at doing to try to improve that. And it really is multifaceted. There's lots of work we're doing with the council to look at how we deal with the movement of vehicles, partly through the work we've been doing on bus lanes, and a lot of that is looking at specifically things like traffic lights, for example, because if you look at bus delay, broadly speaking, it can fall into a number of different categories. It can be things like traffic congestion. It can also be congestion at junctions. But one of the other things as well is that it can be delayed sometimes when people are getting on and off the bus, when the driver's actually having to handle cash. About a third of bus delays is caused by that. So one of the things that we're very keen to push on with is the introduction of a smart card system similar to London's smart Oyster card that they have, and we are pushing very, very hard to introduce our Walrus card as our kind of Oyster variant for Merseyside, as one way of helping to speed up that process. Another thing we're also doing is rolling out real-time information. So you as a transport user at key bus stops will be able to see not only when the bus is scheduled to come, but also actually when it will be coming, in terms of is it delayed or something like that. And not only will that be at some of the key bus stops, actually we've just launched 2 smartphone apps, which if you download those will tell you that real-time information as well. So crucially, you might even be able to see if the bus is on time before you leave the house. And that's the kind of information that I think is vital for passengers. The final aspect, how I think we perhaps need to think about our bus network, and it's one of the points you've made about the congestion, about the amount of vehicles on certain streets in certain parts of the city centre. I'm very much of the opinion that we should be looking at how we can recast our network. If you look at much of our local bus network here in Liverpool and Merseyside, it's pretty much substantively unaltered over the past few decades. If you want to go back far enough, actually a lot of the bus services are inheritors of old tram routes. Now, some of those routes are correct, and I'm not suggesting otherwise, but I think there's a really great opportunity to sit down with passengers to actually work out where their journeys to and from are, not just on the bus, but before they walk to the stop and when they get off the bus, where their end destination truly is. There's a real good opportunity to look at how we can recast bus services which actually serve passengers' start destinations and end destinations better, because it comes back to that point about offering a package which people want to use, and if we can craft the services which actually are more in line with that, then that's a great way of attracting more people onto the bus and getting more bums on seats. So I hope that gives a good sort of roundup of the kind of things that we're doing and the kind of things that we would like to do as well.
I'm sure we'll get some more ideas as well. Just want to plug Nottingham, because Nottingham has a one ticket system for getting through. It should be on, I think, already.
Should it be on?
It's on.
Oh, right, yeah.
Hello? Yeah. I mean, the other, yes, we have introduced a smart card system. We've got it's called the kangaroo card, but following a similar theme, because you can hop on and hop off any of our buses, trams, and local rail services where there are some. The big constraint with it is that we can't control the fare, so at the moment we are required to offer that ticket at a premium, so therefore it costs people more money to do that. Because the operators won't agree to it being the same price as their own network cards, and that is a massive constraint to actually people taking up that offer. Although it offers good value for money in itself, it is still more expensive than the own operator cards, which discourages people. The only other thing that we're doing is to control the number of buses on some of the streets, is we've actually introduced something called a slot booking scheme, which actually means that in the city centre we only allow a maximum number of buses to use each stand, and there's like a 5-minute window where they're allowed in and out again, and that actually is done through a statutory quality partnership, and that controls the number of buses on certain streets. But on our busiest street we've got over 200 buses an hour using that. Which, that does result in them getting in each other's way and causes congestion, as the gentleman has highlighted.
Thank you very much. Next question.
My name's Rhiannon Hawker, and I'm Health and Wellbeing Lead from the University of Liverpool. I've really enjoyed the talks tonight and actually the comments from the panellists, so thanks for that. But one thing that really grabbed me was the idea of the Place Directorate from Bristol, which I think is a fantastic idea. I wondered if you could give us any more information about who's actually involved in the Place Directorate. In particular, I'm interested in whether or not you liaise with colleagues from Public Health. We heard from Bruce from London that there is that they're taking on board much more of a health emphasis in terms of transport in London. After you've answered that, I'd like to put to the panellists from Liverpool whether or not they might be thinking of something similar to be put in place in Liverpool.
Okay, so to answer your question, we've got a new strategic team completely in place since the Mayor's got into power. We have a new strategic director coming from Bradford, and it's very much about bringing all the different elements together, and his vision is very place-focused. In terms of public health, we've actually been working very closely with public health since I came into this job 4.5 years ago. We have people embedded in our transport team, and very much the points that Bruce picked up on is about actually getting people active in their daily life. And we've got a very clever doctor in my team who knows this stuff far better than me, but he shows this chart where the evidence now is something scary, like 2/3 of cancers can be put at bay and improve your life chances just from being active and healthy. We're designed to be healthy, active people. And so there's huge things about that, actually about young people, childhood obesity, huge challenges in the country. We know that it can get children active and eating healthily, their learning and life chances are phenomenally better. So just very basic things that seem to have taken us centuries to understand, and we now seem to start being and understanding them. So cutting across all what we're doing in transport, planning, economy, is this underlying thing about people and their life chances and their health and their opportunities. And I think it's been a real eye-opener actually for a lot of people. Some people probably left the organisation as well because they felt it's not perhaps the world that they wanted to be in, but the people who are there are loving it and enjoying it.
Andy, do you want to... Are we heading to a place directorate here?
I'll touch on the public health element first, if I may. Obviously, with the PCT now being based, with us in Millennium House, that's obviously helped us immensely with things like, our work on 20 mile an hour speed limits across the city and drawing funding and working very closely together. And I'm firmly, convinced that if we weren't working a lot closely together and much more closely aligned, then those opportunities may not have realised themselves perhaps as quickly as they have done recently. In terms of place directorate, we don't have that in the City Council. What we do have is we have services that have gone through significant change over the past 3 to 4 years. The council's driven out £191 million worth of efficiencies over the last 3 years. In the next 3 years, we've got a further 156 million to go. That's going to see further significant change. It's going to see a significant reduction in the headcount. That's going to mean that services are going to have to come together in a different way than perhaps they're shaped currently. So whether it will be called a place directorate or something different, I've no idea, but one thing I can certainly be sure of is the way in which we're structured today. I am convinced that we will not be structured in that way in 3 years' time. So significant changes ahead. I know it doesn't answer your question, but what I can firmly say is we are going to have to work differently in the future to that which we do today.
I'm going to leave it there just to get some more questions. Next one.
Hello, Mark Osborne from Transport Planning Society, Liverpool. I must concede that, well, bus-dominated streets is an issue, aren't we? Kind of missing the whole car-dominated streets. It's a bit like complaining about the front door needs painting when there's no roof on the house. But I was going to say, as someone who's lived in the city centre for 8 years and worked and played, do we focus too much on our centres and kind of forget about the rest of our cities, which are the origins for our trips to the cities, where most of our people live, where our industrial areas are, our parks, where our food, where we buy our food is from, and also where our children are educated. So some questions to go everyone really, are we focusing too much on our centres and not forget about the rest of our cities?
Probably. I know for sure in London there's a tendency to over-focus on central and inner London. And actually I think it's really interesting on the cycling, for example, that the Mini Holland initiatives was aimed purely at outer London boroughs. And we were talking before the start about how there is a huge opportunity to change how people travel in those areas. And actually, if you want to get modal shift away from private cars to public transport and cycling, then outer London is certainly probably where the opportunity is. I think it's not an either or, clearly. You need to do both. I can understand why there's often a focus on the centre, because you want to almost kind of get that right and then work your way out. But a lot of it obviously has to do with the transport patterns, as you said, and London is quite a monocentric city. I mean, we are blessed, there we go again, with great public transport and everything else. But undoubtedly there are still too many people driving into London as well. Just on the point about buses and everything else. Competition for space and everything else, buses are a challenge. I think the other thing as well is to think about freight and commercial vehicles. I mean, that's certainly where the growth is coming from in London at the moment. And much more difficult, obviously, to shift goods out of those vehicles than it is people, I think.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Alice, but your last comment about freight is really important. Liverpool 2 hasn't yet come on stream. It's going to be an absolute nightmare. The thousands of freight vehicles on our streets as a result of that is going to be amazing. We need to... Alice, you live outside the city centre. What's your comment about city centres being the place where people are starting?
I do think it's important to showcase things in the city centre because it will be seen by the most people. But I'd say in Liverpool, a large percentage of the investment in cycling that's happened so far is outside of the city centre, and in a way routes don't quite make it into the city centre, and then you kind of get dumped on the periphery. It's a bit tricky to get across the city centre, so there is a need for investment in the city centre as well. I think it's pretty equal inside and outside the city centre.
Thank you. Another question? Okay. Nice stretch over.
My name's Jean Grant and I'm an ecological artist. I believe people were designed to walk, and I'm wondering if you're thinking about the walkable city. For the last year, for a variety of reasons, I've had to walk, and I live about 2.5 miles from the city centre, and my understanding of the city has grown immeasurably through walking.
I I suppose there's a little pun coming here. I think we've made great strides in terms of improving measures for pedestrians in the city centre over certainly the last 10 years. City centre movement strategy as was, made some massive improvements in terms of how we can access the city and how pedestrians move around the city. One of the projects that I referenced earlier on, the £33 million that we've drawn in for the city centre through the growth deal, is about connectivity across the city centre, and it is about making better links between things like the waterfront and the city centre, and how we make improvements to that for pedestrians, in principle. Other areas, like for example the Knowledge Quarter, and access across the university campuses, again that's another area of work that we are focusing on, and projects like Exhibition Road in London, fantastic pieces of public realm, completely changed the way in which people are able to use those streets. Whilst we may not have the kind of funding that Exhibition Road has had at its disposal, those kind of principles are the things that we are looking at in terms of how we might change the nature of some of the streets for the better for all road users, but in particular for pedestrians, and better connectivity across some of those locations.
Hilly Bristol, quick word.
Yeah.
Is it fit for walkers?
It is and it isn't. I think the challenge that we face is about the point about cars really, and who you put in first. So if you look at a lot of schemes that have gone in the past, when you've got a difficult junction, lots of traffic there, often you see pedestrians have to cross a middle island, or sometimes if you're lucky a second middle island, and then you get across the road. And so in that sense you're not making it very livable or walkable, because you're saying clearly that you've got to sit and wait and deal with the noise and the pollution and go across. I think that's the challenge back. So our Temple Gateway scheme is trying to say, can we get people across the road in one hit on the busiest road in our entire network? And we're pushing the tube and come to that solution and do all the stuff about place as well. So I think there's a bit of recognition that perhaps all the policies talk about pedestrians being the highest in the hierarchy, but perhaps the practices haven't always done that when it comes to the difficult trade-off. And that's probably where an elected mayor can help us as officers by making some brave decisions about where you are putting genuinely people first in, and rather than perhaps second or third is perhaps the practice on some of the schemes in our city and other cities.
I love to hear people first being mentioned again. Bruce, quick, 1 minute.
Yeah, so just briefly, I think the other point is my first positive trend, if you remember, was vote bike. And an ongoing message we've always had at Movement for Liveable London is actually, we don't just want cycling campaigns. It's much easier to get people to campaign for cycling issues than it is for walking issues. But actually, what those cycle campaigners need to become is champions for a much more livable, which means walkable, city for everyone. So it's kind of making sure that you join up those things, not just in how your local government works, but also how your campaigning locally works as well.
Okay, another question.
I just wanted to ask, I'm with an interest in Nottingham, how planning and transport is very much integrated. I was wondering if that could transfer more to Liverpool, and the SIF, the Strategic Investment Framework, literature control, looked at very specific areas, city centre, Knowledge Quarter, etc. But it would be wonderful to look at more a transport strategy, more holistic for the whole of Liverpool and Merseyside region, and look at where the origin destination of vehicles going into the city centre, do they really need to do that, and rethink whole transport corridors, and link that with planning, and maybe link that with green infrastructure, and that would also help air quality and pollution issues as well. I was wondering what you thought about that.
That sounds like it should be a Liverpool one. Liam, do you want to just have a quick word?
Yeah,
and then
fine. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And, yes, sorry, I apologise, give a politician a microphone here all night. No, I think actually we're in quite a good place with the coming together of the Combined Authority. Because one of the things that does do is bring strategic planning under its wing, as well as transport and a variety of other things as well. So I think we're at the start of a journey. I think it's one that can be built upon and can be strengthened, but I think that's starting to come back together. Is that brief enough for you?
That's great. Sure.
I think Liam's hit the nail absolutely spot on there. The Combined Authority gives us that opportunity. I think previously, whilst we did, we've obviously got a Merseyside local transport plan. What we have now is a real opportunity to come together as a city region, including Holton, now to actually bring all that lot together and really start to make a difference.
Great. Another question up here.
William Chambers from Enviro Solution. I just wanted to ask the panel their opinion on filling in bus stops. About 5 years ago, Mersey Travel filled in a lot of bus stops, in effect had buses stopping in active traffic, and it just creates problems obviously for the payment aspect and holds up all the traffic. I just wondered, quite straightforward, if you were in agreement with filling in bus stops and having that's it really.
Is that a Mersey Travel question?
Yeah. If you want a simplistic answer, no, because I think actually it makes sense to have a bay for a bus to pull into. However, it would have to depend on each kind of location. And as for what was happening 5 years ago, that was before my watch, so I'm not entirely sure, but I'd have to have a chat with you afterwards.
Anybody want to comment on buses and bus stops? It's on.
I mean, in Nottingham, we don't put buses in lay-bys, they generally stop. We fill in nearly all of our bus bays, and they do. Unless there's actually a bus lane, then we don't use bus lay-bys. Just simply because of the problem that the buses can't pull back out into the traffic.
I'm really enjoying hearing the other cities as well as Liverpool. I don't know whether other people are finding it really good. So we get a question from Liverpool about what we're doing here, and we can be a bit defensive about it. Should we or should we not? And then Nottingham says, well, we just fill them all in. Wow, okay. It's just good to hear that variety and different ways of doing it. Another question.
Hi, my name's Harry. I'm an architecture student in the city. Being to the first seminar and seeing example projects here and the way that Copenhagen have dealt with their changing, I just wonder, seeing so many great projects, just being a bit nervous whether Liverpool will perhaps approach this in a sort of copy-paste scheme. We see how great cities will approach this. Perhaps the lesson learned from Copenhagen last week is the fact that they systematically study their cities. Every 5 or 10 years, when they make changes, they go back and systematically restudy their city centres and see, the effect of their changes. I just wonder, Liverpool panel, your approach on how we can make this a very Liverpool-centric scheme and a scheme focused on Liverpool.
A really, really good question there, indeed.
I think one thing that we can be really confident about is the fact that there was massive changes that took place in the city 10, 12 years ago. City centre movement strategy, probably £250 million worth of investment in transport infrastructure that was done both through public and private sector funding. Huge changes. That was fully reviewed, and we fully understand the implications of that work and how that affected the transport network. What we now have is a document called the Strategic Investment Framework, and what that's done is it's looking to build on that work that's been done previously. That's allowing us, with funding that I talked on earlier around what we've drawn in through the growth deal, to be able to look to make further changes to our network. One thing that we can be really sure of in Liverpool is this is a very unique place, and it will always continue to be a very unique place. And one thing that we always like to try and do is learn from others. We talked earlier on about this being a free benchmarking exercise. But one thing that really strikes me about all of the presentations is, as I said earlier, we've got very, very similar issues. They're just in different places. And we're all trying to do very, very similar things, just with different pots of funding and different political makeups in many of these locations. So that's the challenge for us as officers in terms of how we deal with those sets of circumstances. But one thing, as I said, we can be really sure of is that what we will create is a very unique sense of place for Liverpool that will be fitting of this great city.
Good. I like Harry's question. I think it's really important. I'm going to take 3 final questions, then we're going to round it up. And I've got 2 over here and 1 just here.
Just to follow on, my name's Carl, local resident and a cyclist and bus user. Just to follow on to what my counterpart said here, around making informed decisions about the city and movement of people. And one of the things that strikes me about Liverpool, and perhaps other cities too, is that organisations collect a lot of data. So, for example, as a bus user, I've many a time been surveyed by people on the buses. Where did you start your journey? Where are you going to? What was the purpose of your journey? How many buses have you used or different modes of transport? Similarly, from Liverpool City Council, they do traffic surveys. They've got a traffic management system which monitors number plates of vehicles that move around the city in order to determine sort of the time it takes to get from one part of the city to another. My question really is, we're compiling a lot of big data. What are we doing to inform decision making around design and route planning, and what are we actually doing? Are we utilising this data that we're compiling in order to make more sensible, informed decision making?
Good, another really good question. Andy, it's all coming back to you in a moment.
Great question. I think you heard earlier on from Councillor Robinson around real-time passenger information and the app that is actually out there for people at the minute. So I think it's a really good example of how that information is being used to provide much better information to passengers. From our perspective, in terms of the ANPR, the automatic number plate recognition work that we do, we use that regularly in order to tell us the congestion that we have on the network and how we're performing. Are we doing good? Are we doing bad? Is that indifferent? What are the causes of those differences in journey times? Is that because of traffic signal works that's going on? Is it because of emergency work from utilities? Is it development activity? Or is it just that we're not performing as well as we should be doing? So that's a really good suite of information that you talked about that enables us to challenge and test ourselves in terms of how we're performing and the service that ultimately we're providing to the taxpayers of Liverpool and others who have cause to travel on or through our network in Liverpool. I think one of the great examples that I can probably finish with is the bus lane review that we've been undertaking currently. You've referenced huge suites of information that we've gathered. We've actually been able to use that information in a very positive manner in order to give us a real range of data it's allowed us to complete a full and overall statistical analysis of how those bus lanes perform. We'll be coming back to Cabinet on the 24th of October with an outcome of that work, and I'm sure that will prompt a huge amount of interest from other local authorities in terms of the work that's been done so far, but in terms of the data that's gathered, and that's probably a great example of where that information's been used to give us a really good suite of information that we've been able to analyse, and provide a really good investigation into what's been quite a very topical subject over the last 12 months.
Hello, my name is Thomas. I live in the city centre in Liverpool. We heard from Bristol that Bristol had bold ideas and a mayor who was instrumental in driving them on. So my question to the Liverpool panel is, what are Liverpool's bold ideas, and does our mayor also help driving them on?
We've got lots of bold ideas, and I think actually in Joe, as our mayor, we've got someone who really does have a very strong vision, and actually he's taken us forward and pushing forward on a lot of things. And he actually is making a lot of the political airtime that other cities perhaps aren't making. So I think he's actually delivering us lots of benefits and getting us noticed a lot more nationally and internationally. In terms of some of the specifics, there's lots of different things I could tell you, whether it's specifically to transport, about some of the big plans that we've got, about campaigning to secure a full high-speed rail link coming into the city, about a 30-year strategy for our local rail network based on how we want to not only match demand for that network, but actually grow that network and improve that service as a way of helping grow the local economy. There's lots of other strategies as well, more broader than transport, whether it's about how we maximise the opportunities of our visitor economy. One of the great things about this city is it's world-renowned, more so than virtually any other city in the country, how we can really trade on that and bring more tourists to the city, how we can maximise the opportunities of our port and the renaissance of our port through Superport, and how that will be not only significantly important for us as a city and the city region, but actually for the whole of the north of England, with its potential to bring more goods and freight back through Liverpool and beyond. And then that's before you think about advanced manufacturing, trading off a lot of our great opportunities with things like, for example, Jaguar Land Rover and other key manufacturers in the area, and some of the kind of scientific things that we've got. If you look at our hospital sector as one sector, we've got some of the most forward-looking hospitals and research departments, and so let's build on that as well. So now that there's a really bold vision, and with Joe spearheading that, I think as a city, our kind of future is as exciting as any city in this country and as any as you'll find internationally, in my view.
Can you think anything about placemaking or pedestrians or cycling on board?
Yeah, and I think that we've got those similarly. We're going through a process, particularly with regard to cycling, have a proper strategy for the city about how we can develop that and make cycling part of people's daily lives. If you look at, for example, the cycle hire scheme that's been launched, that's been twice as successful as was forecast. It really has caught on. And if you can see how well spread across the city it's becoming, it's not just about the city centre, actually. And that's great to see as well. Likewise, a lot of the great stuff that's happening with our local plan development process. I think people in this room will probably be greater experts than I, and some of the kind of governmental changes that we've had to adjust to because the national government have been a challenge. But the way we're pulling together a local plan that actually will help support the city for many decades to come, I think gives us a very good opportunity to improve.
Hello, my name's Alan Bloodworth. It was a lot of talk about investment and funding, and I just wondered what proportion of the funding was down to local people, council tax basically. And I can foresee a case where we've got the local bus companies saying, great, they've been encouraged onto buses, more revenue for us, which seems a little bit unfair to me. Anyway, comments please.
I think that's a very good question. I could come back on that in the sense that if you look at where things are done slightly differently, London being a very good example, one of the things that the London model allows, because the fare box revenue goes back in the first instance to Transport for London, it allows a larger element of cross-subsidy. And my own belief and view is that if we were given similar powers to London, as London had over the bus network, we would be able to do something similar to London. Perhaps not the same, but I think it would be quite an interesting conversation with operators, with all the districts across the city region, how we could craft something that would be a better network, that would be more integrated, that would be a more compelling proposition for passengers, but also potentially would have a greater opportunity to cross-subsidise and take pressure off the public purse. So that, in a nutshell, is why I think there's better ways than we currently have outside of London, and I would be quite encouraged if this government, or certainly the next government, would give us that opportunity.